Like many sci-fi horror games, we wanted to make a zombie-style creature that would serve as the basic enemy type. But how do you add a unique spin on such a well-worn trope, and is that even possible? G'day, I'm Jordan from It's Got Stealth, and welcome to the Samurai Unicorn development series. In this episode, we're taking a look at the most common vermin type that you will encounter in the game, and how we brought them to life. In Sydney 3, the vermin plague is caused by the spread of parasitic headset creatures called vermites. Much like the head crab from Half-Life, the vermite attaches itself to the head of a victim and mutates the body into something more monstrous while slowly absorbing their brain. Early versions of the script often referred to them as VR addicts, and this idea of people losing themselves to a futuristic VR experience would form the basis of the personality we tried to inject into the vermin. Thematically, this puts us in an interesting place where vermin are not completely mindless and can fluctuate between overtly bestial behaviour and more melancholic or at times comedic behaviours as they partially act out scenes from their former lives. This is an element of the vermin we often put to good use when showing how they interact with the Dream Eaters or in crafted sequences that you might stumble across while exploring the mission location. Despite the vermin functioning like you would expect from a zombie-style enemy in-game, we mainly view their role in the story as being something more akin to the putties or other foot soldiers from Power Rangers. They are monsters, but there is a hint of comedic potential lingering under the surface.
In the earliest stages of the design process, the vagrant type were envisioned as emaciated humans, with their biomechanical skin suits erring towards a pale flesh tone. This was very much in line with the initial idea of them being VR addicts who had neglected self-care to the point of zombified corruption. As we shifted more towards Samurai Unicorn becoming a game, the need for vermin variants led to what we would eventually call the Prowler vermin, as well as a desire to make them a little more monstrous to fit in with the rapidly evolving backstory for the Dream Eaters. The most immediate effect this had on vermin was the increased size of their VR headsets and more spindly limbs to help create a nicely defined silhouette which players would use to easily identify them as an obvious enemy. The textures at this time were almost one-to-one frontal projections onto the models, which were heavily based on the concept art to begin with. Aligning the cables and conduits embedded in the skin, things came together rather quickly. Looking back, I think the greenish colour they have today stemmed from wanting to push the sickly nature of them further. Dream Eaters share this biomechanical design language, but oftentimes have their own colour scheme to adhere to, whether more monochromatically grey or blood red for example. Future vermin types will have more unusual bone structures and rigging to reflect their mutated forms, but for now, the basic vermin type has a humanoid skeleton that makes it relatively straightforward to export for Unity. It's actually a lot of fun injecting personality into their movesets, leaning heavily into the hunchback gremlin vibe, and this is where Eric's magic comes in.
Let's take a closer look at how the Vagrant's AI works behind the scenes. First up, we have a robust sensor that handles both vision and hearing for the vermin. This system scores targets based on various weighted factors like angle, distance, and how visible the object is, then provides the best matching target to attack. This score is then aggregated over multiple frames, so the higher the score, the quicker the enemy will detect the player. It also provides noises heard to the AI system, so the vermin can investigate sounds when they haven't seen the player yet. We can also change enemies to be monster closets here, which means they ignore all sounds and immediately wake up when the player enters their view. After that, we have a simple target selector that reads all the detected targets and decides which is the best one to engage with. This system can easily be expanded to consider information like distance to target or how much damage the vagrant has received from that target when making that decision. We architected our AI around a finite state machine where states are made up of multiple actions and transitions. Actions can be anything from patrolling a path to playing a one-off animation. This allows us to combine several simple behaviors to make enemies that appear smarter. For example, we have an action that has a random chance to play a roaring taunt animation the first time entering the attack state, or play a startled or looking around animation when entering the investigation state. This allows us to keep actions relatively clean and simple by keeping only logic that pertains to each specific action in a single script. Our basic attack target action handles the meat and potatoes of navigating to a good position to attack from, choosing a valid attack from the enemy's AI attacks data, and managing edge cases like when a door is in the way between the attacker and their goal so they can transition into a door attack animation. Because this game takes its melee combat inspiration from Software games, the Vagrant's animation blend tree drives a lot of logic. We use animation curves to decorate all the animations to define things like disabling attacks during big stumbling hit reactions, limit rotation during attacks and stumbles, or setting when an attack is parryable during an attack's animation. I also want to give special attention to the data structure architecture we use to manage the various attacks enemies can do. Because of the complexity involved in a limb removal system, each attack needs to account for both what limbs the enemy currently has and doesn't have. For example, they can't do a double swipe attack if they're missing one of their arms, they can only do crawling attacks when they're missing one or both of their legs, and they kick if they're missing both arms but still have both legs. This system also accounts for factors like distance and angle to target. Lunge attacks require a certain range from the target to be considered valid, and we have quick turn attacks for if the player is trying to kite the enemy but still within melee range. Vagrants can also have their AI attack data overridden, which is how the first one you encounter in the kitchenette has a limited moveset compared to the other enemies in the level. The last tool we have for making the Vagrants act more unique is the health script. This is where we randomly trigger one of 15 different additive hit reaction animations depending on where the Vagrant gets shot. We also have another 12 full body reactions we refer to as stumbles because they cause the enemy to stop in place and play out the full animation. This can be anything from grabbing their face after being shot in the head, dropping down to a knee if shot in the leg, or full on stumbling around the environment if they are shot in the legs while running fast. Besides triggering at least one animation per hit, the health component also checks for damage done to individual limbs, and when the damage reaches a specific threshold, we use a procedural limb chopping algorithm to chop the limbs at runtime. This not only feels rewarding from a game feel sense, but it also directly feeds into the flow of the combat encounters. We drew inspiration from Resident Evil 2's reactive enemies, which show that causing an enemy to stumble and create an opening to escape is just as valuable as taking the enemy out for good. On the flip side, we took inspiration from Dead Space's limb removal system, which is why you can shoot off the legs of a Vagrant and cause them to drop down and only be able to crawl, or shoot off their right arm to stop them from being able to use their most powerful attacks against you. Tactical thinking against Vagrants saves bullets and helixes, which you'll need for the tougher enemies out there.
Knowing that most vermin will be susceptible to the limb dismemberment mechanic means that we have to constantly think about their movesets and make sure that they have different attacks depending on what limbs they currently have, which in turn leads to the need for transitional animations for when these limbs are shot or cut off. So there ends up being quite a complex list of animations that go into just one of these vermin types. With the parry system in mind, I was conscious of making sure that there was enough time to telegraph the Vagrant's attacks before they strike, to avoid potentially frustrating or unfair moments in combat. I think it's currently in a nice spot, if a little challenging to first learn. The Vagrants being one of the smaller variants means that their attacks and moves are quite spry and airy, though they still pack a punch. Of course, with other vermin types that we've developed, and at this point even implemented, those come with their own adjustments to make them stand out from the baseline Vagrant, making them larger, slower, and giving them a far more powerful presence in general. Syncing the Vagrants up with Clo and Unicorn for the finisher moves proved quite the challenge at first. We knew different enemies required different finishes, so they were more tailored to specific moves that had to look cool and feel nice and smooth. It was the first set of animations that relied on an external factor being timed correctly. Until then, everything could be relatively simple in implementation, having a classic hit and react back and forth that made combat feel like it works just fine. But with things like decapitation, fancier dismemberment, and graceful samurai-inspired sword plunges, the Vagrants and their body parts had to be in the right places at the right times, which is something we'll be continuing to improve as the Unicorn combat has tightened up.
Later missions will see Vagrants starting to use makeshift weaponry like clubs, knives, and shields. The hope here is to create new and challenging scenarios for the player as they become well acquainted with the Vagrants and how they attack. But don't worry, you won't just be fighting Vagrants throughout Sydney 3. In the basement section of the Goliath offices, you'll find Prowlers, Vermites, and the Bruiser waiting for Clo. Each of these vermin offer a different challenge that will encourage you to tackle them with all the tools at your disposal. Then in future missions, you will discover more unusual variations of the vermin that Mother of Infection has created to do the bidding of her master. Well, that will do us for this episode of the Dev series. If you'd like to support the project, please wishlist the game on Steam and consider subscribing to our Patreon or joining the Samurai Unicorn Discord community. Until next time, thanks for watching.